I'm Julie Cunningham, Director of the Oklahoma Water Resources Board. Been around a little while. I like to tell the story, started 25 years ago as a temporary doing field work in our lakes management division. I made $6.50 an hour, the best job I've ever had. When you don't realize how many beautiful natural resources, beautiful lakes we have in the state, it was really a great opportunity to really see the beauty and the resources that we have. Now, I always thought they were simply for recreation, but come to find out they have all kinds of functions. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Maybe. It looks like it's disabled. Do you have a way to share that?
Yes, you should be able to try it now.
There it is. So there we go. You see that? So, Rob, I usually have a habit of talking longer, so I've got my my timer on so that you will have your full 15 minutes. So anyway, I really appreciate the invitation, Susan, the Oak Institute. You guys are doing a fantastic job. You know, just to watch you as our host, very energetic, and it just reminds me of how resilient, you know, when any day that I get to speak to the water community, our students, all the way to our professionals and our legislators, and it just really it feels like home to me. So anytime I can present here at the OCA conference, I'm certainly thrilled to do that. You know, we've had an interesting year, I think, in water, or not water, but in the world pandemic and everything else. And I think just like we talking about water issues and water resiliency, you know, water planning and management doesn't stop. And so I think I will stop there and just give you a few slides here of our water plan, the exciting new flood plan, and then some updates on some other projects that we're doing. So I would like to start with just talking a little bit about the Comprehensive Water Plan. If you've ever heard me speak, you've probably heard me talk about that every time I speak. It's really our fundamental kind of guiding document, if you will, in the world of water management. So we are required by statute to update this plan every 10 years, to have a long, you know, create a long range plan. So this one was, we really did a good job quantifying supply and demand by region, looking at those wastewater and water infrastructure needs, identifying those supply gaps, projections in population growth and economy. And then we had the 4-year stakeholder engagement, which really gave us those founding recommendations in state policy. So since then, we've made significant progress at all levels and all use sectors. You know, every time I talk anywhere, I hear, you know, I'm hearing the Water for 2060 Act and conservation and efficiency and planning. You know, it's really about planning long-term, thinking long-term and planning long-term. And, you know, I just want to give a shout out. So many Oklahomans, our elected officials, our legislators, you know, even the new legislators legislators that weren't around at that time have really embraced and really tried to educate themselves on water issues, and they want to help. So we've certainly seen that. So briefly, I won't go over these, but I think Secretary Wagner mentioned yesterday, these are kind of the pillars, if you will, the priority recommendations that were identified in the last water plan. The infrastructure financing, I talked to our team yesterday, and I asked them, how much financing have we done since 2012, since this plan? And it's almost $2 billion. You know, we have several loan and grant programs. We operate one of those with the DEQ, but $2 billion in investment. I mean, that tells me that these communities and these rural water districts are dedicated, and they know they need to invest in their infrastructure. So very exciting. So I'll go through a few of these. I just wanted to really talk to you about the legislation, and, you know, Senator Paddock was very involved in the last water plan, all the interim studies that you've done that really led to some of this legislation. So I won't go through these, but We just wanted you to see, you know, I mean, the gross production tax that the legislature supported, which really supported and funded the implementation then of the water plan all these years, and then it's going to help fund the next water plan as well. We got our beneficial use monitoring network, first ever groundwater monitoring network statewide. So we're examples for the nation, really. Waterford's 2060 Act, as you all have heard about. Several water reuse framework, aquifer storage and recovery framework. I know the city of Ada has really been a pioneer leader the entire time in the whole development of the aquifer storage and recovery framework, and Rob was instrumental in crafting those rules as well, the statute as well. Pilot programs then in the aquifer in Ada for ASR in 2018, you know, looking at implementation of the maximum annual yield and trying to allow water and water use and protecting people's rights with spacing, existing water wells with spacing regulations. We addressed water quality wells and marginal wells. For the first time ever, we can now use, and drillers can actually drill wells that produce marginal water so that we can save those fresh waters. So we've done a whole lot. 2020, you know, we had some oil and gas. Secretary Wagner mentioned yesterday the oil and gas produced water, really the effort to try to use that produced water. And then the last one, Senate Bill 1269, is a state flood resiliency plan. And I'll talk a little bit about more about that. So fast forward to 2020, you know, we're scoping for the 2025 update right now. Today's trends are, and we talk about this, are showing more frequent weather extremes on both ends of that hydrograph. And I promised I wouldn't put up the hydrograph that typically we see with all the arrows and the trends back and forth. But you all know our NOAA and, you know, the Oklahoma weather survey, and you know, we're experiencing these things, and we certainly have to plan for it. So you know, we're looking at record rainfall and flood losses becoming larger and more costly. I mean, these really equate to dollars that we're going to have to address. So also, as you know, water infrastructure is aging and storage capacity inventory is lacking. For the vast majority of our reservoirs, we don't know how much storage capacity is left. They're over 50 years old. So I think there's it's time for more holistic vision for water management, investment, and cost analysis. Flood planning is certainly woven through the comprehensive water plan, but really it's focused on drought since the beginning. So just quickly, the record flooding in Oklahoma, this picture or the map shows that all the dots are dams. All the green and red dots are jurisdictional dams, 4,700 dams in the state. A lot of those are high hazard dams are the ones in red. So you can see the blue counties are the ones that are disaster declared counties. So even in western Oklahoma, we're seeing huge disasters, flooding disasters, and we've got some vulnerable infrastructure in those areas. What was shocking to me, 416 counties, towns, and cities impacted, with less than half of them participating in the National Flood Insurance Program. So where it's flooding where we typically do not see flooding or do not expect flooding. So quickly, the Water Board's Hazard Mitigation Authority rests in the water planning and our statutory responsibility to help with local planning and the state's plan, as well as all the different floodplain management, dam safety, and water well drillers licensing that we do with the state. Here is a kind of a brochure that we passed around the legislature. I won't go over it, but we really identified, you know, lack of public awareness, lack of coordination when you're talking about flooding between local, federal, state entities. So we really just think we can do a lot more, especially in information sharing and data and those base level flood maps and those types of things. So we're hoping this flood plan can really bring all the activities, all the things that are going on in the state from everyone, including the tribes and the communities and the federal state agencies into one place, and really elevate floodplain management in the discussion when we're talking about water planning. So Senator Rader, Senator Sims, and Representative Eichley Freeman we certainly appreciate their support, that had overwhelming support, this bill in the 2020 legislature. So it directs the Water Board to develop the first ever statewide flood resiliency plan. We're hopefully going to be a model for the region. Definitely will allow us to integrate not only drought planning, but flood planning. And we're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about storage. Storage is critical for drought. Capture those rainwaters and save them for when it's drought, but it's also critical for flood control as well. So I think we can certainly leverage state dollars, and hopefully we can self-fund it as time goes on. So as far as the 2025 plan, we're going to really focus on infrastructure and quantifying that inventory of infrastructure need out there. We're certainly going to need everyone's help in this effort. So we'll be reaching out and doing some water system surveys, and really trying to work with different economic development groups, the tribes, communities, to really get a good handle on what those water needs are and what those needs are going to cost. First time ever looking at flood control, and then focus on improved online tools, dashboards, models, really things that communities can use, water suppliers can use, the public can use to do long-term water planning for water resiliency. Our stakeholder engagement, we're going to employ several different layers of focus groups and to help with scoping the plan, as well as looking at projections by sector and making those policy recommendations that were so successful last time. So preliminary timeline, basically we're starting to hire those engineering firms and those contractors, and really engaging in the next 6 months, really engaging and hoping to get a really good scope of work. So I'll quickly mention, I know James Gamble is going to talk about this later with the director of the Rural Water Association, but this has been a hugely successful program, this Rural Water Sustainability Alliance. Really the leadership came from the Rural Water Association, and they are out there. We've worked with them, as well as DEQ has worked with them for many years to provide, kind of this technical, financial, managerial support on the ground, boots on the ground, for these local communities to really help them run their systems, identify issues. I know the Water Board is doing some mapping, so a lot of these systems don't have their lines mapped, and some simple things that we don't really think would be critical, where this group and this effort is doing. So I'll let James talk about the results. I did grab this list, and so I wasn't even aware of this alliance. There's I think about 32 communities that have already participated in this. So I'll let James really reveal the results, which is pretty exciting. We're engaged in several different collaborative studies. The OWRB Phase 2, everyone's heard about. We're going to hear a little bit more from USGS on that. We're in year 2 of a 5-year data collection phase. And I apologize for putting C-C nations, but I was running out of space, and I know it's hard to read all these slides, but I wanted to give this presentation so that you would have it. So that is my symbol for Choctaw and Chickasaw. So apologize for that. But we're basically engaged with a lot of different studies with the nations, with the communities, with the Bureau, USGS, OWRB, our water banking strategy, which is a Chickasaw grant with the Bureau of Reclamation, which will be very interesting. Hopefully we can get a system set up where we can share water rights and try to conserve water and get water to people that need it. The water settlement planning, the Governor Anatubby mentioned that yesterday. We agreed to meet annually at the minimum annually and talk about water planning activities of the state and the tribes and how we can coordinate. So we're talking right now. Secretary Wagner mentioned the Blue River. We are looking right now with the Choctaws and Chickasaws and nations and OSE and ODWC in the economic valuation of consumptive and non-consumptive uses, and then non-regulatory investment opportunities. So really solving those problems, looking at the needs of all users, and then figuring out how to make more water, how to store water, how to save water. So I think it's a good effort. It's a good, we're finding out a lot. There's a lot of things that are going on around the country that are doing just this. Canadian River Model is another one where we're looking at modeling basically water needs and potential vulnerabilities long term. I won't mention the other ones. Illinois River phosphorus water quality standards rulemaking. We are engaging in public virtual meetings right now on that. We've got new, pretty exciting, hopefully you'll hear from Trey Lamb later from Conservation Commission, new soil health economic value study in the Master Irrigators program that we're co-funding with OCC and with Oklahoma State University. So they're creating a new Master Irrigators program, and we're supporting high-tech soil moisture probes for those irrigators that go through the program. So that's very exciting. I think those irrigators are excited to be a part of it as well. And then the last one, the produced water chemical characterization, spatial produced water quality database. Those will really tell us where the water sources are and help DEQ hopefully understand if we do get to discharge, stream discharge and regulatory process, that will help inform that study. So luckily this is my last slide because my beeper went off, my time is out. So expanded digital products and services. I just wanted to let everyone know, as we're working through remote operations, please check out our website. We've got all kinds of virtual things that we've launched, lots of new dashboards and maps and statistics and help desks and complaint reporting portals, and I think successfully our virtual public meetings and our board meetings have been really successful. I know last night actually was the second of the water quality standards rulemaking informal public meetings, and they held those virtually. And I think we're seeing a lot more people being able to participate through those virtual things. So we're probably going to keep some of this stuff as we get working and back to normal. So I think that is it. The arrows are pointing to our sign up for our Gov delivery. So for more information, please check out that website and sign up for our newsletter.
Julie, thank you so much. You guys are really busy, got lots of projects, lots of good things, lots of collaborations. We appreciate you being here today and all you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And right on time, so yay. Rob, you're up.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. As Susan mentioned earlier, my name is Rob Singletary. I'm General Counsel here at the Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality, and I, like Julie, very excited to be here today and very happy to provide DEQ's regulatory update. I know many of you are familiar with Scott Thompson, our Executive Director. He really wanted to be able to participate today, but unfortunately, he was double booked. He's speaking at the Environmental Council of States today, but he did want me to go ahead and pass along his greetings to everyone and to also share his enthusiastic appreciation for the work of the OCA Institute and East Central and the partnerships that they have with DEQ and a variety of entities on a whole variety of different water-related topics. So again, he wanted me to pass along his greetings and his appreciation for all those efforts. With that said, I'll go ahead and jump into our regulatory update. Kind of like everyone else in the state, the last 6-7 months have been pretty challenging for operations. DEQ, like everyone else, was pretty significantly impacted, at least initially. During the initial lockdown, we have a staff of approximately 500 full-time staff members, and those staff members, essentially 100% of them worked either in the field or in the office with very little teleworking options or remote working options. So we went essentially overnight from 500 folks in the building to about 90 to 95% of our staff working remotely. You can imagine there were some challenges that were associated with that, logistical challenges, technical challenges, getting everybody connected to the internet so they could be productive in and of itself was a challenge, since all state agencies use the same IT group over at OMES, and you can imagine there was quite a bit of strain on their capacity at that time. So we were able to work through those challenges pretty darn quickly. I know, speaking for myself and for Scott, we were both amazed with how quickly our staff was able to adjust to those challenges, especially considering how abrupt the change happened. So this was really within a week. We went from full-time operations in the building and in the field to a large percentage working remotely. So very impressive how quickly the staff was able to adapt to that and pick up the ball and continue providing those necessary services. So where are we at right now? Well, consistent with the governor's reopening plan, we're currently operating at about 30% of our staff in the office or in the field on any given day, with the rest of the staff working remotely. Clearly, as conditions continue to improve, hopefully the percentage of our staff in the building and in the field is going to just continue to increase proportionately pursuant to our phased return to normal operations plan. Like Julie, I think there's probably going to be some long-term remote working options that are going to be available. There's been some efficiencies that have been discovered for certain tasks and for certain types of work where it can actually be a little more productive to do that from a remote setting. So we're going to put together, or we're in the process of finalizing, a long-term telework policy that's going to help us do that. But I do want to mention that even under our current conditions, we're continuing to accomplish our core functions and provide those core services that we provide at the DEQ. One of the things that has continued essentially as normal throughout this entire pandemic has been the state lab. Continues to operate under normal conditions. Or under normal normal services, I should say. It's critical work for public water supplies throughout the state and other entities. It's necessary to keep the public safe and healthy. So we've taken a lot of safeguards, rotating, different shifts to ensure that, if there was an exposure, it wouldn't knock out or wouldn't, cause the entire lab staff to have to go into some kind of quarantine or something. So we've taken a lot of steps to try and keep that from happening, and we've been successful thus far. So that, clearly isn't work that can be done remotely. So that has been a success throughout this process. Similarly, environmental complaints, we still work those just as we always have. I think we've worked somewhere in the range of 2,200 or 2,300 environmental complaints since the pandemic began back in March, which is actually an uptick from the same number of environmental complaints that we received over that same period last year. So those efforts continue. We continue to have administrative enforcement hearings, rulemaking hearings, as Julie mentioned, public meetings on permit applications. Those are continuing to occur. Facilities still need to get their permits. Some of those meetings can occur virtually. Some of them we have to do in person. We do have some statutory constraints that we're trying to work through. For instance, for a Tier 3 permit, we have to have a public meeting if it's requested at a location that's near and convenient to the facility at issue in the application. So that's something that does require an in-person meeting. But we've been able to take appropriate precautions and kind of work around the situation that we have to ensure that those meetings are occurring as necessary and as required, keeping the permitting process moving forward, and definitely allowing the public to participate. We're looking at different options now of having hybrid meetings where we're able to have those meetings in person, but for those who are uncomfortable with participating in public meetings in person, that we're going to try and provide a virtual option for that as well. But there's some additional technical challenges to that we're working through currently. Also, thanks to, I should say, and thank you to the legislature for the emergency changes to the Open Meetings Act that was passed back in March. As a result of those, we've been able to have several of our advisory council meetings over the last few months virtually, similar to the meetings that the Water Board's having. And that includes our Water Quality Management Advisory Council meeting. I know we had one of those back in June. We've got another one scheduled for next month. For next week. Both of those are going to be done virtually. Last week, we had our first Environmental Quality Board with a virtual format, and it seemed to go off without a hitch. So it's very, and I agree with Julie, it seems like we actually had, considering the agenda that was set forth, a larger number of folks attending virtually than we probably would have had in person. So it's nice to kind of increase that access to the public to participate in the rulemaking process with the agencies. We've also had a few changes in our enforcement policy. Like EPA, we issued a temporary enforcement discretion policy. Essentially what we did is if compliance with a permitting requirement or a regulatory requirement is directly attributable or prevented as a result of complications from the pandemic. This was more pertinent kind of in the early stages when there were some travel restrictions in place and folks couldn't get out to their sites to do monitoring as required. We were conducting a kind of a case-by-case analysis for folks who requested assistance in that effort. And the idea was, what can we do? What reasonable accommodations can be made that allows for compliance to occur and for public health to be protected without putting people's employees at risk. So again, those are case-by-case determinations. EPA's policy expired a couple of weeks ago, I think at the end of August 31st. Our policy is going to remain in place until the governor's executive orders are allowed to expire. So as long as they are active or current, then that policy will stay in place as far as state enforcement goes. That brings us up to date on the DEQ operations. Scott wanted me to just touch on a few items of local interest as well. Julie mentioned Aquifer Storage and Recovery, or ASR. For those of you not familiar, I'm sure you're at an OCA conference, so all of you are very familiar with the concept. But what it is it allows excess water during times of plenty, like we're seeing now, to be captured and stored in an aquifer and saved for use during times of drought, which we know are just around the corner. Like Julie mentioned, about 4 or 5 years ago when I was general counsel with Julie over at the Water Board, we were able to help develop some legislative language that allows for ASR here in Oklahoma. It wasn't an option prior to that statutory language, and both OWRB and DEQ have since promulgated rules that allow for the implementation of this statutory authority now. And as Julie mentioned, I believe City of Ada is still considering possibly becoming one of the first entities in the state to take advantage of this option. And that consideration is somewhat tied to the Phase 2 Arbuckle-Simpson hydrologic study that Julie also mentioned, that's being undertaken by OWRB, the OCA Institute, our East Central University, USGS, along with participation by Chickasaw Nation, DEQ, and a whole host of other entities I know are very involved in that. I got to be one of the attorneys when I was at the Water Board that got to argue and defend that maximum annual yield determination associated with the original Arbuckle-Simpson hydrologic study. So it's great to see that effort is continuing with the Phase 2 study. Ultimately, whether an ASR permit's issued for the Arbuckle-Simpson and the City of Ada, or whether it's issued to some other entity and over some other aquifer, it's going to have to be issued by DEQ's USC program. So that's the program that actually will do the issuance of the permits. And I know that DEQ's chief engineer, Asaba Tiamasi, that all of you guys, he's very active with both ASR and the Phase 2 hydrologic study. So he's very engaged in both of those efforts, and hopefully he and others will be able to provide updates as those efforts continue. The next thing I wanted to bring up was produced water. I think Julie mentioned a little bit about that during her presentation, and I know Secretary Wagner mentioned it yesterday. There's an incredible amount of water used in oil and gas exploration and recovery, and the disposal of that produced water that's generated can be challenging sometimes. So there's been a big emphasis on finding new ways to treat that produced water and to turn it into something that can be put to a beneficial use. The big issues obviously are the technical obstacles. Those are the ones that the produced water work group that Julie chairs and that our executive director Scott Thompson participates in. I mean, those are the technical issues or the real issues with produced water. However, there was one significant legal obstacle that was kind of getting in the way or had to be addressed at some point in order to encourage those technical obstacles to be overcome. And the reason that it's an obstacle was everyone knows produced water in and of itself has little value or no intrinsic value unless there's a lot of money, a lot of effort that's invested into it to convert it into something of value. Unfortunately, obviously there's not much of an economic incentive to invest in that effort if you're not the one who owns that ending product once it's made more valuable. That's a little bit problematic in Oklahoma because groundwater is owned by the surface estate owner in the state. That's set forth in Title 82. It's been the subject of many Supreme Court decisions in the state, so it's very well settled law. Groundwater owned by the surface estate owner, except for the amount that's necessary for a mineral estate owner to explore for and extract hydrocarbons. Nowhere in the statute is produced water addressed. So that question of ownership has always kind of been out there. As Secretary Wagner mentioned yesterday, he and his office kind of spearheaded an effort last year or this last session to address the issue of ownership through Senate Bill 1875, which was enacted. And what that did was essentially establish the development that the folks who developed oil and gas wells, that those are the ones who actually own the produced water. And they have not only the right to use that produced water, but the right to any proceeds that are generated as a result of the use of that water. So with that issue resolved, hopefully that clears the way for Julie and the produced water work group to focus on those technical issues and feasible challenges associated with addressing produced water. Also, somewhat related to produced water is the status of DEQ's request for EPA to approve our delegation of the state to regulate discharges related to oil and gas activities. The state received delegation from EPA to implement discharges pursuant to the Clean Water Act many decades ago initially. And under that delegation, DEQ regulates municipal and industrial discharges into waters of the state. And the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture handles similar discharges from agricultural sources. But there's one subset of industrial discharges that the state never requested and never received delegation from EPA on, and that's discharges related to oil and gas activities. Currently, if a facility wants a wastewater permit related to oil and gas activities, they've got to get it from Region 6, EPA Region 6 down in Dallas. One reason is DEQ and no other state agency actually had authority over those discharges pursuant to state statute. So a few years ago, back in 2017, there was legislation that was passed that allowed DEQ and the Corporation Commission to seek authorization from EPA to administer any and all programs regulating oil and gas discharges into waters of the state. So at about that same time, we've got the legal authorization under state statute. DEQ, Oklahoma Corporation Commission, entered into a memorandum of agreement, and we're able to essentially designate DEQ as the agency that's going to regulate those discharges.